So this presentation on the DNA of CX, I decided to develop this as a sort of a challenge to us practitioners and also a wake-up call for something that's fundamentally missing and a fundamental question that I see organizations not answer, which means that many times their ultimate aim in CX fails. Let's start off with this. There are two basic approaches in CX, obviously at the high level, but two basic approaches in CX. One I call Project CX. Project CX runs the gamut from bells and whistles type stuff. So we have projects. These are the things that customers will probably refer to. So you did something super cool, super special. That could be tech-enabled. That could be anything, some kind of special thing, investment, but basically a bell and a whistle. Customers would identify that thing with something that your company has done. It's easy to invest in. You buy it, you implement it. The company finds it easy to invest in. Customers easily identify it. The only thing with the bells and whistles is even though you have that thing and customers love it, they don't necessarily say your entire company is CX oriented or customer centric. They just kind of have a very cool thing or things that your company does. Two, big box version of Project CX, and this is where, you know, if you're investing huge sums of money into things like NPS systems or other kinds of tech, it can be in this bucket as well. So again, it's relatively easy for a company to invest in. When I say easy, what I mean is it's easy to identify what is it we're spending the money on, what is it it's supposed to do, and once we spend this money, can we identify what we have bought? So that's what I mean by the big box. And so Project CX fits into this range. And many times, most of the CX efforts that companies put forth are in the Project CX bucket. Then we have this other one, which is the DNA CX. This is really people-oriented CX. And if you ask for any type of transformation, why don't transformations succeed? And this is CX transformation, digital transformation, any kind of transformation, thinking about cultural transformation, whatever it is, the general rule, just Google it, you will find that roughly 70% of transformations, give or take whatever, fail because people don't adopt, people don't change. So the idea is that people are at the heart of this DNA CX. So the question becomes, what is DNA CX? And the idea here is when you have statements like, we want to have the customer at the heart of all that we do, or being customer-centered in all that we do, you know, some version of that sort of language, that's usually a kind of sentiment or statement that you might find in your annual reports, or even the vision of what CX is supposed to do with your company or how we operate, other kinds of things. It's somewhere in there. This is very common, these sorts of words. 15 years ago, those sorts of words were not so common. Now they're common. But what does that mean? And my challenge is that while we say that, I think oftentimes, obviously we don't do it, but oftentimes I don't even think we know what it means. And some classic questions. So what is DNA CX? In some sense, I've already outlined that. We're talking about what people do with CX, and that's a clever, when we talk about the people, who are we talking about? All the people. When we say we mean all of us in an organization. And that's fundamentally the real problem. The second question down below is, can you develop DNA CX, or must the business be born with it? Obviously, if you're a startup or a new company, the difference between being born with it and developing it is if you're starting up, or even if it's a function or a big major division of a established business, if you're starting up, you can hire people with this DNA. So Zappos, as an example, was famous for making sure that people, no matter where they were, even if you were the accountant, you know, the staff accountant, you had to kind of demonstrate something in that interview process that you actually had this customer mindset. They had that luxury, they had that privilege, and they acted on it, and then Zappos became what we generally know as Zappos. If you don't know the company Zappos, look that up on Google, and I mean, they were bought, but you can see what they were, what they represent, and that's true DNA CX that they have, as one example. If you're a large business, which I think most of us are, established, we didn't come out of a CX genesis. That's not how we were born. So what happens there? Well, you have people already. Many of those people have succeeded. They've built their careers, not necessarily with a CX mindset. So what has to happen with those people? Well, that's where the transformation comes in. And if there isn't enough investment to those people to actually transform them, what you will have are projects in an organization where people are not really practicing CX. So my challenge is, if that's true, and since most decisions that are made in an organization will be made by people who don't have the CX mindset, what's the outcome of that? Well, you can guess what the outcome of that is. The third question here is, how do we know if we have DNA CX, or to what degree? How do we measure it? And I'm going to give you two very simple, sort of high-level approaches. One, I'm going to call the delivery gap test. This is probably more familiar to most of you. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm just calling it the delivery gap test. So here, you are an organization. You kind of say, we do some great stuff. We're measuring ourselves. We have KPIs. You have process KPIs. You have all kinds of whatever KPIs you have. And then you have some voice of the customer type stuff on this side. I think most of you know the general stats out there, something like this, that when you ask businesses, are you doing CX-oriented things? Are you doing some great things? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? Justify yourself. They would say, yes, we're doing excellent things. Look at our KPIs, look at this, look at that. Customers, tend to love us, and we have measures that say that. But when you honestly ask customers independently, is that company doing so great? Then you get something like this. And that gap, that space demonstrates that to what degree you have DNA CX. It's not, did you like the bell and whistle thing that company is doing? Do you like that company? Are they living it? Are they living CX? Do you feel it's coming out of their pores? And this gap is the delivery gap. So that's pretty straightforward. We say this, customers say that, there's a difference. Now we need to kind of work on trying to narrow that gap. That's a standard one. The interesting one, and the one that I want you to take away, is what I call the cubicle Bob test. Why cubicle Bob? Well, a guy, his name was Robert Proust. He worked for Herman Miller. He developed something called the Action Office, which effectively became the cubicle. So the famous cubicle that we all have was developed by this guy. So I just use Robert short for Bob. I just used this term, cubicle Bob. What does cubicle Bob mean? Imagine this. Imagine you have your headquarters, your floor, your office, your whatever, and what you do is you have some die, random number generator or whatever. And you say, let's imagine you have 10 floors in your building. Throw the die. Out comes floor 7, randomly. Okay, great. On that floor, you have, 200 desks, and you get another random number, 137. So you go to the 7th floor, desk 137. That's cubicle Bob. Ask that person in their everyday, business as usual day jobs, what do they do that helps CX? And I don't mean helps, I mean in real terms, what is it that they do for CX? How does CX impact their job? If we didn't have CX, if we had that statement, we don't have that statement, what changes in their job? If they worked for the previous company and now they're at your company and your company talks about CX in this way, what has changed for that cubicle Bob? If they can't answer that question and you multiply that across the majority of the population, then we almost have an answer. I don't expect CX to live in this organization. It's pretty straightforward. When I was a consultant, before I joined Majid Al Futtaim, I used to do this test. I literally would walk with someone and say, let's just go to a random floor, let's go to a random desk, and I would have some simple questions to ask. Now, it puts some people on the spot, but before I even do it, I would say, let me predict what's going to happen in this test. And that would really bring home what is the need for DNA CX and why Project CX, although great, is not going to make CX live in an organization, which means the things that come out of that organization, much of it will not be what we would consider to be great CX. So, the fundamental question, what should cubicle Bob do in their day jobs in CX? Think about it. Think about these job titles, regular job titles. They're not CX team titles. They're not marketing. They're not social media. They're not any customer facing. It's the behind the scenes, all those people behind the scenes. What should they actually do? And I think we haven't answered this question. It's a difficult question, by the way, if you start looking at some of these. What should a deep stack IT person do something different? What is it? And the challenge that I have for organizations is that they don't tend to answer this question. And if they don't answer this question, again, I just follow it back. Do I believe that most people in this organization don't really do anything for CX? And if I believe that's the case, then I don't expect CX to live. So let's not talk about CX. It's not really going to happen. We have bells and whistles, but we don't have CX in the DNA. So if you're going to answer this question, I think there are 3 principles that you should have. One, the answer should be applicable to everybody, top down, everybody. So it's not, here's a major decision you should be able to make, because not everyone can make those major decisions. So that's number 1. It should be observable. So if it's just, I think CX is important, I mean, so far we don't have scans that looks at people and understands what's happening in their heads. And number 1, it should be practical in a business as usual context, on a day-to-day basis. You're not in the journey mapping workshop, you're not developing personas, you're not on that project, that bells and whistle project, you're just doing your regular everyday job. So, is it know the CX strategy? I'm sure that's part of it, what you'd hope people to know, roughly speaking, but does the deep stack IT person need to know the CX strategy? Is the definition of CX good, but does that do anything? Does everybody in the organization need to know how to journey map? I don't think so. You could go on with lots of these questions. Know about NPS and inner loops and outer loops and feedback and this and that. Possibly, maybe that's part of it. Do you need to talk with customers? Does everybody in the organization need to talk with customers? Well, probably not, and probably some you definitely don't want them to talk to your customers, because that's not their thing. So what is it then that we want people to do? Well, I say that there's 3 things, very simple. Obviously, these things need to be so simple that they can happen for anyone, anywhere, every day on the job. Ask better, more complete questions. So if you think about customer-centric questions, what would someone ask? What's this look like from the customer's perspective? How does this potentially impact the customer? Just like in finance, I don't have to have a degree in finance, but if I put something forward, I already know that I'm going to ask, this probably costs a lot, this doesn't cost a lot, is there a cheaper way of doing it? If I'm health and safety, I can think, does this have some health and safety implications, and so forth. So we need some very simple questions that we ask in CX. 2, once we start asking those questions, we have to get better at answering them. I almost guarantee if the average cubicle Bob asks these questions, they don't know how to answer them. But if we start asking, we will get better at answering them and understanding how to answer them. 3, if we understand how to get better at answering them and start to get those answers, we start using them, and we'll get better at using those answers. By the way, the point here is not we will always do the CX-oriented thing. Even when we get those answers, we have choices, because we're in a business. Sometimes we do the CX-oriented thing, sometimes we have to do it because of the cost cut and other kinds of things. But there's a prerequisite. In order for any of this to come to life, there has to be a belief in CX. And I don't believe, on average, there's a true belief in CX in an organization, the cubicle Bobs. They understand now to head nod, what I call bobblehead CX. They understand how to, hey guys, we're on CX, you'll get the head nod, you'll get that bit of it. But when it comes to actually actioning any of this, to do the things I'm talking about here, the simplest things here, but even to pay attention to some of the big box stuff that you guys are doing, you'll get that bobblehead. The only way to get around that, to prevent the workarounds, or to get middle management to actually follow the top-down approach that the CEO and everyone else is promoting, and not just kind of waiting it out until that change happens, is for there to be a belief in CX. That cannot be mandated. So if it cannot be mandated, but it's required in order for this business as usual DNA CX to happen, how do you get to it? Well, there has to be an investment. And what I would say a fundamental missing is that oftentimes we do bells and whistles, we do big box, we even maybe think about DNA CX, but there's no investment in trying to get to this belief. And getting to this belief requires nurturing. It's a major part of any transformation program, but it's not just a program. It's not just you sat in the classroom, you took the online course or whatever. It's a constant nurturing and a monitoring of true belief. By the way, although you could potentially mandate that everyone ask this question and ask that question, as you know, as you go through a budgeting process, you have to identify or justify some CXC thing on the budget. You know that can be a cursory tick box exercise. In order for it to have meaning, the belief has to be there. So just on that point. Now, what does all this mean? We have these stages. There's the status quo, which is no CX, effectively, or at best, bobblehead CX. Then there's what I would call the project to big box CX, or the bells and whistles to big box CX, the project CX, that's in the middle. There you're relying primarily on compliance. True belief may not be there, but we have some things in place, and oftentimes we're using NPS and other systems to kind of do that check on things. If you're in the financial side of things, you may have some requirements about how you submit budgets, and it has to justify some things, but typically it's tick box on that front. To get to the DNA CX, it has to rely on belief, and it's a cultural transformation that we're talking about. If you look at the little balls, status quo is at the bottom there. Then you start working on projects, you start investing in things that's easily to identify. Procurement can get involved, contracting can get involved. They can identify what we get on the back end, so that's the project stuff. And then there's this investment in trying to get our people, the cubicle bobs, to actually believe in CX. Ultimately, what we're talking about is cultural transformation. Culture is what happened when the leader, or when we're not being monitored. So it's not about, I'm doing this for the NPS itself. It's about being not being monitored. In order for that to happen, belief is crucial, which means we have to invest in nurturing people to actually believe and not assume that there's belief because we have the bobblehead. And with that, that's my presentation. Any questions? Challenges?